One aeroplane roared into battle with a dangerous edge. The F-8 Crusader lit up the skies of Vietnam in legendary turn and burn air combat, earning the nickname, the last gunfighter. Using state-of-the-art computer animation, join us as the powerful F-8 Crusader battles it out with the deadly MiG-17. Experience the battle. Analyze the tactics. Relive the dogfights. On the 19th of May, 1967, 12 F-8 Crusader fighters streaked towards Hanoi, the capital of communist North Vietnam. The Crusaders were escorting two A-4 bombers, about to release the Vietnam War's first strike on the center of Hanoi. The A-4s would unleash the new television-guided Walleye missile on the city's thermal power plant. Leading the fighters was Commander Paul Speer, an experienced pilot on his 150th mission.
The whole idea was to get the A-4s, the two A-4s, in there on the target and get them out. We knew it was important to get the Walleyes in there, and it was a snarling place to go over Hanoi.
With only 44 MiGs in its Air Force in 1967, North Vietnam deployed these fighters sparingly. But on the 19th of May, the communists would use every weapon they possessed to defend their capital.
We figured that if we were going to go there, they were going to come up and challenge us.
Crusader pilots like Lieutenant Phil Wood relished the challenge.
We were looking for encounters. We were begging. We would go to bed at night and pray, say, please let me get involved with the MiGs. Well, they wouldn't come out.
As he cruised into Hanoi airspace, Phil Wood spotted a U.S. Navy A-6, part of a diversionary bombing mission. It was fleeing the target area with a MiG-17 tight on its tail.
The MiG was in the saddle, ready to shoot, I think, because he was right there.
Wood had to get on the MiG's tail. He kicked in his afterburner and swung his nose 180 degrees to the left.
And I had this buck fever, you know, first time.
He fired too soon. In turns higher than 2 Gs, the heat-seeking Sidewinder loses lock. The MiG spotted the missile trail and pulled a hard right.
And the MiG broke off the A-6, and he heads for the deck. He turns to the right, and he's descending an afterburner. I'm chasing this guy away from Hanoi. Down on the treetops, and I'm right on his tail, and I'm gunning. I have to actually lower the nose to get the pipper on him. Well, guess what that does? I'm now descending into the top, so I could only fire a short burst, get back up and do it again. I could see some of the shells hitting the wings because they sparkle when they hit. And I'm so hungry to kill this guy, I forgot what my primary mission was. Now, I should be out there protecting the A-4s. So I broke off, and I headed into the Hanoi Basin.
Meanwhile, the A-4s had pulled out of their attack run and were heading for home.
That was their only mission left in life now, was to get out to the water and get back to the ship.
But suddenly, a squadron of MiG-17s streaked in behind the American formation. Commander Paul Spear and his men broke away to engage the MiGs. As the F-8s and MiGs closed on each other, the last gunfighter's lethal reputation would be severely put to the test. With the arrival of the supersonic age in the early 1950s, the US Navy needed a heavily armed, carrier-based jet fighter capable of breaking the sound barrier. In June 1953, Chance Vought Aircraft won the contract to design and build the new fighter. Within 2 years, the first prototype F-8 Crusader was airborne. Equipped with a Pratt & Whitney J57 engine, the new aircraft broke the sound barrier on its maiden flight. Not long after, it became the first American plane to top 1,000 miles per hour. On the 16th of July, 1957, an F-8, piloted by future astronaut John Glenn, set the transcontinental speed record. Flying from Los Angeles to New York in just 3 hours and 23 minutes. The F-8 Crusader wasn't just fast, it was maneuverable and versatile. A superb dogfighter that could also serve as a bomber and a photo reconnaissance plane. During the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis, it was an F-8 that had taken the incriminating intelligence photographs. In 1957, the Crusader was deployed to the aircraft carrier fleet and quickly established itself as the US Navy's chief air superiority fighter.
The Crusader was a landmark aircraft. It was a tremendously capable dogfighter. In fact, pilots were fond of saying, when you're out of F-8s, you're out of fighters.
Loaded for combat, the F-8 could still reach 1.5 times the speed of sound and climb to 40,000 feet. The J57 engine was so powerful that the aircraft could climb at an unprecedented 21,000 feet a minute.
I fell in love with the engine because so many times it saved me. It pulled me out of deep trouble. It could withstand all sorts of abuse, and Crusader pilots abused that engine probably more than we should have. They call it graceful degradation. It's a fancy buzzword, but it's an important one. And that is a very important factor in a tactical airplane. It can take battle damage and continue to operate.
When pilots strapped into a Crusader, they knew they were at the controls of a thoroughbred dogfighter, capable of downing enemy aircraft with missiles or guns.
They like to say that it was the last of the gunfighters because with its 20-millimeter cannon, it was really the only close-in fighter that the Navy had for the entire Vietnam War.
The other fighter in the Navy's fleet was the F-4 Phantom, a two-seater armed only with missiles. When Lieutenant Phil Wood finished his training, he was given his choice of the two fighters. He picked the Crusader.
And I said, you know, I'm a gunfighter. I'm a fighter pilot. I want to have an airplane all by myself, and it had a reputation for being a kick-ass and take names.
On the 19th of May, 1967, that reputation was tested as never before. With a squadron of MiG-17s streaking in, Commander Paul Spear and his Crusaders splintered and targeted their own MiGs. The fight quickly escalated, and the airspace above Hanoi turned into a maelstrom of flak, anti-aircraft fire, and Crusaders and MiGs in full throttle aerial combat. In the middle of this chaos was Paul Speer. To the left, he spotted a MiG at his 7 o'clock, closing fast. Speer turned into his attacker. Soon the combatants were locked together in a rolling dogfight. A single mistake could mean the difference between life and death.
I'm John McAlmont, and ever since I can remember, I've sliced things open in search.
This was
Crusaders, the US Navy's only gunfighter, was escorting A-4 bombers for the first bombing raid on Hanoi. MiG-17s had been scrambled to attack the retreating Americans. Paul Speer was soon locked in a complex aerial maneuver called a rolling scissors with one of the MiGs. In a scissors, pilots cross canopy to canopy, reverse their turns, and cross again, over and over, each trying to position their nose behind the enemy's tail for a shot.
The feeling then is that you're going to get him, you know, and you're going to take that F-8 and turn it every which way Sunday to get behind him.
The maneuver made it almost impossible for the MiG to get an effective shot. Both aircraft covered a mile every 3 seconds as they closed.
You're constantly pulling G's, constantly working, rolling the airplane. And bear in mind also that you're trying to look, and so you're constantly twisting your body back and looking. You're constantly moving around in the cockpit.
As they descended, the much lighter MiG-17 was able to pull tighter turns than the heavier Crusader, eventually getting on Speer's 6 o'clock. Speer had to break out of the scissors.
I remember thinking, that guy's intent upon killing me as much as I'm intent upon killing him.
On the next turn reversal, Speer pitched up in a high G climb, breaking out of the MiG's fight and flying vertically, so that the Crusader's powerful engine could even the odds. Speer was now perched above the MiG, waiting for the next move. The MiG rolled back, expecting to see Speer still in the scissors.
I think when he rolled back then, expecting me to be here, I wasn't there. And it got him startled for a minute because he rolled his wings level, and I know he was taking a look around. And he lit his afterburner, and then he dove for the deck. And of course that sets me up, because when he did that, he's ending up in front of me.
Speer and his wingman nosed down and aimed at the MiG.
I fired a missile, but I hardly saw it because the G's on the airplane, the missile separated and immediately went ballistic, and it didn't track at all. Then I kind of settled down a little bit and pulled around, and I realized that I was in range, and I fired a second Sidewinder, which went up and detonated by his tailpipe.
The Sidewinder flashed in at twice the speed of sound, shredding the MiG's tail.
The expanding rod warhead on the missile got him and took his tail off. He ended up rolling over and going into the ground in a fireball.
The heat-seeking Sidewinder was often fitted with an expanding rod warhead, which consisted of yard-long steel rods that on detonation fanned out into a giant spinning steel ring. The missile only had to get close for the rods to obliterate enemy aircraft.
I was a fighter pilot in Korea, and I was a fighter pilot a long time, but this is the first time you do what people think fighter pilots do all the time.
It was Commander Paul Speer's first kill against an admirable adversary. The MiG-17 was a generation older than the Crusader. Due to its longer wing and taller tail, it had much greater stability at near supersonic speeds than its predecessor, the MiG-15. It was also the first Soviet fighter equipped with an afterburning engine, the Klimov VK-1F. Crusader pilot Paul Gilchrist flew a captured MiG-17 to log its flight characteristics for the US Defense Department.
The MiG-17 is a wonderful turning airplane at speeds below 450 knots. If you're in excess of 450 knots, it takes Arnold Schwarzenegger to turn the airplane. I had all I could do pulling to make it turn at about 500 knots. And the control column, which was made out of steel, was actually bending. I looked down and it had a little bit of a curvature to it, so I decided, I better not break anything.
This glaring weakness was exploited by Crusader pilots. Due to its sturdy airframe and hydraulically boosted control surfaces, at high speeds the F-8 could turn as tight or tighter than the MiG-17. But at low speeds below 450 knots, the MiG-17 still reigned supreme. The key in a dogfight for any Crusader pilot was to keep the MiG at high speed. On the 19th of May, 1967, Crusader pilot Paul Speer had just downed a MiG-17 as the churning dogfight above Hanoi reached fever pitch. Lieutenant Phil Wood, who'd been chasing the MiG, returned to the fight.
I mean, it's just surreal. You couldn't believe it. Surface-to-air missile trails and the magenta pink explosions, the 57 millimeter, the dark black, and the gray 37 millimeter going off. I see MiGs on fire going down after having been shot down, and I see F-8 being shot down.
Wood sped into the action, searching for a target.
Next thing you know, I hear the bullets coming by the canopy, and when they come by, they're breaking the sound barrier, and you hear the pops. And I turned and looked back, and there was a MiG-17 right on my tail.
Wood broke hard left, lighting his afterburner for extra speed. But in doing so, crossed right through the MiG's gun sight. 2 shells exploded directly behind his seat, blowing out some of the aircraft's most important electronics.
And that's where your avionics are, and that's where your navigation equipment, where your air conditioning is, because it's turning into a heated capsule now. And then it fought the engine, meaning it took some of those parts and stuff down into the intake, which got sucked into the engine. Now I've lost part of my engine power.
Wood was now in a high G left turn with the MiG, the speed of which was too high for it, and the enemy pilot was forced to loosen up. This allowed Phil Wood to get his nose inside and gain a firing angle. But with so many Gs on the aircraft, his Sidewinder missile wasn't able to maintain lock.
So I was losing altitude to keep up my energy, and I kept getting some angles on him. And I finally, when I was almost around like 30 or 40 degrees from his tail, the stupid guy reversed course and was now running for his life. Well, he solved my problem.
The MiG's break from the spiral allowed Wood to straighten out and lessen the G-force on his plane, enabling his Sidewinder missile to lock on.
And I'm sitting in the saddle at 2,000 yards, and I fired my missile. It took off out of the rail. It goes out, and it goes right through his tail cuts off the tail.
Wood cruised past the stricken MiG.
I could see the color of his skin. I could see the patch on his left shoulder, could see his oxygen mask, and then he ejected. I saw him eject. He got seat separation from the airplane, but he didn't get seat separation from the seat, and he just plummeted to his death.
It was Phil Wood's first confirmed kill. The combat was coming to an end. Paul Speer and the rest of the Crusaders were running low on fuel and headed home. Wood flew towards the Gulf of Tonkin, 80 miles away, but his aircraft was in bad shape. His navigation equipment was out, he had no radio, and more seriously, he was slowly leaking fuel. If he was forced to ditch, he'd become a prisoner of war, and the North Vietnamese would show no mercy to an American pilot with a MiG kill under his belt. On the 19th of May, 1967, Lieutenant Phil Wood was flying his damaged F-8 Crusader towards the Gulf of Tonkin. He knew he didn't have enough fuel to make it all the way to his carrier. But luck was on his side when he spotted the rest of the Crusader flight heading for a refueling plane. Matching his speed with the tanker, Wood guided the Crusader's retractable fuel nozzle into the refueling boom.
I plugged in and got 1,000 pounds. It was enough to get me out into the Gulf. So I just headed out into the Gulf. I said, if I find a carrier, I'm going to land on it. It doesn't matter which one. And sure enough, I ran across this carrier that was in the wind, recovering aircraft. The captain of that carrier saw me coming in the wrong side and saw the smoke coming out of my airplane. He knew F-8s didn't smoke.
The carrier's crew quickly waved off their own aircraft, cleared Wood for an emergency landing, and anxiously waited on deck.
When I landed and it got the arresting wire, all that fuel rushed forward, hit the burner cans, and the ass end of my airplane blew up. But anyway, I got aboard. I didn't know what carrier was on, and I looked at the side number, and it had the number 63, and I knew I was aboard Kidiak. And what this young lieutenant didn't know is that 17 years later, I'd be the captain of that carrier.
The Crusaders' first mission over Hanoi had been a success. They'd protected their bombers and downed 4 MiGs.
We get back to the ship, and everyone is kind of ecstatic about the MiG engagement. It was the first of the real big ones there. We had a very successful day in the air. That was the first big day for the Crusaders.
But the North Vietnamese also claimed victory. The Hanoi power plant had survived. The American missile was supposed to fly through a window and explode inside. Instead, it struck the thick exterior walls of the building. Furthermore, Lieutenant Wood's plane was a total loss, and the enemy had shot down 2 Crusaders with ground fire. Although the last gunfighter proved itself as an excellent combat aircraft, at this point in the war, one-on-one encounters with MiGs were rare. The North Vietnamese used their MiGs as just one part of a larger anti-aircraft system, which included sophisticated Russian-built surface-to-air missiles and thousands of mobile anti-aircraft artillery guns. Crusaders were often tasked with destroying this air defense network.
The F-8 could carry quite a bomb load. It had 2 wing points where we put bomb racks. We tried to avoid that as much as possible because we wanted to be fighter pilots, but we had that capability.
But the Crusader was most often used as an escort, protecting ground attack aircraft like the A-4 Skyhawk. On the 14th of December, Air Wing 16, flying off the aircraft carrier Oriskany, left on a mission to drop mines into the Red River Delta, 40 miles southeast of Hanoi. Lieutenant Commander Richard Shaffer, a veteran F-8 Crusader pilot, was escorting an A-4 Skyhawk bomber being flown by Lieutenant Chuck Nelson. Shaffer and Nelson were soon in enemy airspace over Tai Binh. It wasn't long before the North Vietnamese fighters had been scrambled.
We heard on the channel 4 Red Bandits airborne from Bullseye, which meant there were 4 MiGs in the air coming toward us.
Shaffer thought the MiGs were heading for the main strike group, 15 miles away. But they were heading for him.
The calls kept coming, 4 Red Bandits at the 20 miles, 10 miles. When it got down to 3 miles, then I was, shaking like a bridegroom.
Shaffer braced for the fight and rolled inverted above the A-4, which allowed him to keep his airspeed up without overtaking the slower bomber. While inverted, something caught his eye.
I saw something glisten over there, and I looked back at Chuck, and then I looked again, and 2 MiGs flew right between us.
The MiG streaked through and banked slowly left to come around on the A-4's tail. Were they luring Shaffer into an ambush? He knew there were 2 other MiGs somewhere in the area, but he had no choice. He had to engage the immediate threat. Shaffer kicked in his afterburner, nose down, and dived after the enemy aircraft.
This was a setup for the beginning of so many air combat maneuvering flights that I did. Here the fight starts.
Ahead of him, the MiG leader pulled into a tight left turn. The move protected him, but his less experienced wingman couldn't keep up and drifted into Shaffer's firing envelope.
And I got my nose on up, and it was a clear northern sky with the sun off to the west. And that brand new AIM-9D Sidewinder with a super coolant was just growling beautifully. And I fired out at about 1.25 miles. It just looked like a thing from a movie. It flew just under his right wingtip. And that's where it passed under without fusing. Flew off into the wilderness. And I could not believe what had happened at that point in time. It's like having a whole flock of ducks come over and you shoot and nothing falls.
The MiGs dived. Shaffer set up another shot. But suddenly, from 9 o'clock high, another MiG element was diving on him. It was the ambush Shaffer had feared.
2 more 17s really had me in their gun sights and were coming down in a perfect run on me like this. Holy mackerel. And then it brought me back to focus. There's no more getting an easy kill, all that stuff. You're going to have to fight with these guys.
It was the prelude to one of the longest dogfights ever recorded. While the average Vietnam-era dogfight lasted 45 seconds, Shaffer relentlessly pursued 4 enemy MiGs for a heart-stopping 10 minutes.
Before or after?
On the 14th of December, 1967, 4 MiG-17s ambushed an F-8 Crusader piloted by Richard Shaffer. The 10-minute dogfight that was about to unfold pushed Shaffer to the limits of human endurance. As 2 of the MiGs dived in, Shaffer rolled into a maximum 8G left turn to foil the ambush. The MiGs were going too fast to match the turn and overshot. 4 bandits were in the air, and Schaffert's situation was quickly deteriorating. The A4 Schaffert was escorting had fled, leaving him to face 4-to-1 odds. He had to play to his aeroplane's strength.
And I just stood the Crusader on its tail and did what it does best, and that is just climb. Climb like hell. And I went over the top at about 25,000 feet and turned upside down to see what was down there.
The first pair of MiGs are here, in a descending left turn, trying to regain airspeed. The second pair are here, trying to climb to Schaffert's altitude. In his first move, Schaffert would dive past the ascending MiGs, then attack the other pair, vulnerable targets given their low airspeed. Outnumbered, but unafraid, he nosed down. The Crusader screamed past the ascending MiGs at 450 knots. At 10,000 feet, he began to pull out, but the heavy G of the dive ripped away his oxygen mask and microphone. He could no longer radio for help.
Just keeps pulling, pulling, pulling on your face as you're doing this. And mine now was down over my chin, so I couldn't talk with anybody. I don't think I would have needed the microphone. If I had opened the canopy, they could have heard me.
Schaffert pulled up on the first pair of MiGs 6 o'clock. The MiGs turned hard left, trying to shake off the Crusader. He then maneuvered into position for a Sidewinder missile shot. To gain a missile lock, his nose had to be no more than 20 degrees off the MiG's tailpipe. He barrel rolled to the outside and then descended, getting into missile position without losing airspeed. He readied the Sidewinder and fired. But he never got the chance to see if the missile hit its target. At that moment, a stream of tracer flashed over his canopy. The second pair of MiGs had now reversed their climb. Once again, they were diving on him from 8 o'clock high. Schaffert is here. The second MiG element is here. Schaffert would need to fly like a man possessed to escape another ambush.
MiG fights are in nanoseconds, not seconds, but nanoseconds. 1 second the guy is a dot in your canopy, and the next he's past you.
Instantly, Schaffert improvised a unique maneuver. He pitched the Crusader down, then ruddered left, cutting under the MiG's turn. From the MiG's point of view, Schaffert had simply disappeared as he dived and cut under them. Schaffert endured the grueling maneuver. The attack had been derailed. Now he was plummeting towards the ground. He jammed his joystick back and lit his afterburner. Raw jet fuel sprayed into the F-8's exhaust, doubling his thrust, allowing him to soar past the MiGs. The MiGs tried to follow, but their weaker engines couldn't match the Crusader's rate of climb, and they stalled. At 25,000 feet, Schaffert leveled off, hoping for a quick break in the action, and scanned the area once again. The stalled MiGs were recovering, and still very much in the fight. Schaffert looked west, hoping to catch some sign of friendly aircraft. Nothing, but another pair of MiGs at 3 o'clock high. This time, MiG-21s, coming straight for him.
Well, I was, for a moment in time, kind of halfway frozen and said, what in the world is going on?
As Schaffert turned into them, the MiGs fired their Atoll infrared-guided missiles, a reverse-engineered copy of the American Sidewinder. 4 missiles streaked towards the lone Crusader. None of them locked on. Instead, they flew harmlessly over Schaffert's head, and as quickly as the MiG-21s arrived, they departed. It was a guerrilla tactic often employed by MiG-21s in Vietnam. MiG-21s were a rare commodity for the North Vietnamese and used sparingly. In 1967, there were only 16 in use by their Air Force. Using their speed, they would streak into an area, fire all their missiles hoping to score a lucky kill, and streak out, avoiding any dogfight with an American aircraft. For Schaffert, exhaustion from the physical strain of several minutes of high-G combat was starting to take its toll.
Put yourself in the cockpit of that F-8, subjecting yourself to positive and negative Gs, gray out, black out, grunting, straining against the physical oppression of many times the force of gravity. Your 20-pound head in a 5G environment suddenly weighs 100 pounds. But if you don't keep your head moving, you're probably going to die. That's what Dick Schaffert did for 10 minutes.
But Schaffert had sunk his teeth into the MiGs and had no intention of letting go. He shifted his attention to the MiG-17s 10,000 feet below.
They were coming around underneath the position that I was, and this was my chance to make gunfighter mean something.
The MiG-17s are here, Schaffert above them. He prepared to bank left and dive on them. This would give his plane tremendous energy and ensure that he didn't get locked in a low-speed turning fight, the MiG-17's strength. Schaffert nosed down and dived on the MiG element, which banked left, hoping to force an overshoot. Schaffert had to break up the MiG element, first by executing a barrel roll to the outside, then, as he descended, by firing on the wingman. But instead of watching the missile to the target, he'd roll again, positioning himself on the MiG leader's tail. Schaffert rolled. Then fired his last missile on the wingman. He rolled again. As he descended, he switched to his guns. The maneuver had worked. Now it was just him and the MiG leader. But his aircraft was out of missiles, and his guns had suddenly jammed. He was defenseless.
It did cross my mind that I'm not going to be shooting anybody out of the sky. But in this Crusader core thing that becomes so ingrained in you that you are better than anybody else. When you are in your Crusader, you're the king. And so I'm going to beat this guy just to show him I can beat him. No other reason. I'm just going to take him on like he was a student.
Schaffert couldn't eliminate his opponent, but he could instill fear. With violent maneuvering, he tried to intimidate the MiG into a tactical mistake, and then beat a hasty retreat. He was now on the MiG-6 in a tight left turn. When Schaffert broke out of the turn, his adversary seized the opportunity and for a fleeting moment fired on him. But the tracer missed. With his enemy in pursuit, Schaffert went vertical. The MiG climbed after him. At the top of his climb, Schaffert ran out of airspeed and nosed over. The MiG did the same. At the bottom of the dive, they crossed paths and climbed again. As each pilot jockeyed for position, they found themselves locked in a complex aerial maneuver called a vertical rolling scissors. In the vertical rolling scissors, each pilot rolls around the other while climbing and diving. In the climb, they lose airspeed, and the slower aircraft inches closer to his enemy's 6 o'clock, firing position.
I think we were thinking with the exact same mindset. Reverse it back around and get your nose behind the other guy. This is going to get slow real quick as you're going up like this. And if you get your nose just a skosh behind the other guy, you're going to shoot him out of the sky real quick.
Both pilots twisted around each other over and over, both flying at the knife edge of endurance. They'd been fighting for almost 10 minutes, an eternity in the world of dogfighting.
So I can almost sense his nose coming a little farther into me each time as he came around. And about the 5th or 6th time down this, on the downside of this vertical rolling scissors, I could see the next time up is going to be enough inside that his guns will probably cover me and he will be able to fire.
Chafford had to make his move now. The two aircraft hit bottom on another scissors. Chafford abruptly rolled out. The MiG pilot had been caught off guard. Chafford used every bit of his 16,000 pounds of thrust to accelerate away from the MiG at treetop level.
And as I look back over my shoulder now, this guy had finished his turnaround, was coming at me, and then all of a sudden he pulled up like this, and I could see the plan view of his airplane, and he was back about 1.5 miles. So he was calling it quits too.
Chafford's dogfight was an almost flawless example of skilled maneuvering and maximizing the capabilities of an aircraft. Its every move is studied by fighter pilots today.
It's really ironic to me that arguably the most noteworthy dogfight of the Vietnam War did not result in anybody getting shot down. But considering that he was able to fly home and land back aboard the Oriskany that evening was a victory in itself.
North Vietnamese airmen had tangled with a rare breed of fighter pilot.
They probably had a bottle of cold beer and said, "We just met the biggest maniac in the United States Navy." Because Chafford just was a wild man. He never gave him a chance. Even when he was out of weapons, he was still at him.
In the Vietnam War, the F-8 Crusader recorded a stellar win-loss record, bringing down 6 MiGs for every Crusader lost. But ground fire, surface-to-air missiles, and accidents began to whittle down their numbers. By the late 1960s, the Crusader had been displaced by the F-4 Phantom.
This was Cold War time, and they were looking at the threat from the Russian bombers. The Phantom had a bigger top speed and could get there quicker, could climb out faster. The F-4, quite frankly, was a better airplane for the mission.
There were over 1,200 Crusaders built, but in 1987, the last F-8 was decommissioned from the US fleet. The Crusader's dogfighting success gave it the unofficial title, the last gunfighter. But it wasn't the last. Missiles never supplanted guns as the dogfighter's weapon of choice, as military planners had anticipated. All future US Navy aircraft continued to be fitted with guns, including the Crusader's successor, the F-4 Phantom. And close in turn and burn flying, the dogfighting tactics so skillfully executed by the F-8 Crusader and its airmen continue to be taught to all fighter pilots.
I never knew a Crusader pilot that had fear of another airplane. Fear of missiles? You damn right betcha. Or fear of a guy with a lucky golden BB, like John McCain says? Yeah, but not another airplane. And that's the Crusader legacy. To be able to fight with a clear head because you don't fear anything.
Something very strange is happening on this planet.
What if human evolution was manipulated?